Hello everybody, welcome back to Off Meta Musings, and welcome to my complete guide to the Rotmire Creed. Whether you've picked up Heart of Gur for the first time, or you picked up one of the new individual boxes for this warband, I hope that this guide is going to help you out, let you know how I like to play Rotmire Creed, and how I managed to pilot them to good success in a couple of recent events that we went into. Before we get started on that, please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps me to figure out what kind of videos I want to do next, and enables me generally to push the content and make more stuff for you guys. But without further ado, let's get going. Before I get into the stats of the characters themselves, I'd like to go through the Rotmire Creed reaction Bile Blood. Now, the wording on Bile Blood is that a fighter can make this reaction when they're targeted by a melee attack action, and after damage is total, but before it's allocated to this fighter, you roll a dice for each critical scored from that attack action, and for each 3, you allocate 3 damage points to the fighter that made that action. So I've tried several times to get this reaction to work, and my conclusion is essentially that counter is probably better as an all-purpose damage reaction than Bile Blood actually is. Now the reason for that is for each dice your opponent rolls, there's an 11% chance that Bile Blood is actually going to do damage, which is fairly low. It relies on your opponent to critical hit to begin with, and it relies on an additional dice roll on top of that. If the action was just on a crit, do 3 points of damage back to the fighter, I think it would be far better, but as it's written, it's not all that great. The majority of your warband's defense 4 already, so in the situation where you're being attacked, it's far more likely that your opponent misses with a couple of dice than hits with several crits, which would be necessary to make this reaction worthwhile. The other thing I'd like to cover here is the stats that I have on page. So we've got DPA 4, and this is effectively the amount of damage per attack a particular fighter can put out when he's wounding against equal toughness to his strength. So in the case of this Witherlord here, he is strength 4, and if he was fighting against something with toughness 4, he would do 8.33 damage. Secondly, we've got the points per wound. Now, points per wound is effectively the amount of points you're paying. Not the amount of points you're paying, the amount of points you're paying per wound that you can do to an enemy fighter. So that this damage here is actually calculated on a weighted average, assuming 25% of fighters that you're going to be playing against are defense 3, 50% are defense 4, and the rest are defense 5. To give you some kind of context to this, Graveguard have average points per wound of 12.7 under this weighting, and they're the most efficient unit. They're seen to be the most efficient unit in the game. Something like a Skaven Stormfiend is sitting at 20, and the Deathmaster is sitting around 25. It's worth noting that anything less than 25 puts the fighter in the top 30% of all fighters in the game, and are generally considered very efficient in terms of damage output versus the points you are actually investing. So going into the Witherlord, you can see he's got range 2, he's got 4 attacks at strength 4 and with a 3-5 damage profile. On top of that, he's got an average movement of 4, he's got a defense of 4, and he's got 20 wounds going for him. He has access to 3 abilities. One is the Gruesome Harvest Double. So going through these, a fighter can use this ability only if an enemy fighter has been taken down by a melee attack action made by them in this activation. The fighter now has a potent vial until the end of the battle, and while a fighter has a potent vial, whenever they use an ability, the value of that ability is treated as being a 6, even if the ability dice show a different score. So this is going to be very important for Lethal Injection that we're going to go through now. And on Lethal Injection, it's on a triple. You pick a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter and roll a number of dice equal to the value of this ability. So for each roll that exceeds the toughness characteristic of that fighter, you allocate 5 damage points to them. So you can see where you might want to attack someone, kill them, use your double on Gruesome Harvest. Then in the next round, use Lethal Injection on a triple. You're rolling 6 dice, and for each dice that exceeds your opponent's toughness, you're doing 5 damage, which is a lot of damage potentially. And finally, for a quad, he has Ensnaring Strike. So the fighter makes a bonus attack action, and in addition, if that attack action scores any critical hits, that fighter cannot make move actions or disengage actions for the rest of the battle round. So it's an additional attack with an inbuilt net on top of that. So, looking at him, he's got a good damage profile and he's got a solid 20 wounds. So, I think that the Witherlord is overall a decent hero, considering that it's your only choice in faction to take. He's got a very respectable damage per attack of 8.33, which puts most chaff units within its killing range. And of course, the mere threat of a higher damage lethal injection is enough to give opponents really something to think about when they want to try and play around him. Maybe that will stop them from attacking him because, or not even attacking him, from charging into him, because if they don't kill him, a double attack action plus a lethal injection from a Witherlord is pretty much it's almost guaranteed to kill most fighters in the game. I want to go through some scenarios. Because a fighter's only allowed to use one action per activation, we're going to look through, let's say, Ensnaring Strike versus Rampage, Injection versus Onslaught, that kind of thing, and we're going to see what's actually better in those scenarios. So to begin with, like I said, Ensnaring Strike versus Rampage. So Ensnaring Strike is a bonus attack with a net. Rampage is a bonus attack with a bonus move on top of that. And given that Ensnaring Strike is only an additional attack, which most of the time, I mean, yes, the attack is very useful, but the net won't really see any use given the Witherlord's already high damage potential. If he's attacking 3 times, he's looking at on average 24 damage, which is enough to kill most things. The additional move and attack from Rampage is always going to be better. So save your quads for Rampage over Ensnaring Strike. Lethal Injection versus Onslaught is interesting. Onslaught is the double that gives you +1 attack versus throwing in all your dice into lethal injection. This one, it really depends on the target defense. If they are defense 3 and you get to attack twice, you always effectively onslaught unless you've got a 5 or 6 on your lethal injection triple. And the reason for that is because an onslaught nets you 25 average damage on your attack, and this is on your double attack even, versus 29 to 32 damage on a 5 or 6 a lethal injection triple. If your opponent is defense 4, lethal injection is overall better if you've got a triple 4, 5 or 6, because you're doing, again, 20 damage on average using onslaught and between 21 and 26 damage using your lethal injection. If the opposing fighter is defense 5, lethal injection only works on 6s, that's very true, but it's always better to use it over onslaught due to effectively always critting, with your extra injection attacks doing anywhere between 17 and 21.6 damage. It is worth noting that the figures in the table in the picture do cover a single attack and lethal injection action, where you almost always want to use it if it's available. So if you ever have your triple and it's a triple anything apart from a triple 1, so in a triple 2 to 6, always lethal injection if you're only ever going to get one attack, because you're always going to do more damage regardless of the target. Finally, we've got lethal injection versus Rampage. So this is a triple lethal injection versus a quad Rampage. The idea is you always want a Rampage in that scenario, unless you've got a triple 6 for the injection and the target has 3 or 4 defense. So effectively that allows your injection to hit on 4s or 5s, because you've got to roll your dice. So again, always Rampage unless you got a triple 6. So maybe Gruesome Harvested on the previous turn, then that's really when you want to use your lethal injection. And you can save your quad for something else, or you can save your dice. Instead of making a quad, you can make another double, or you can make another triple. The warband overall is fairly double intensive, so maybe that's a route that you want to go through. It is worth noting that a double move action from the Witherlord, followed by a lethal injection on something that's defense 3 or 4, is a very valid play if you have a high enough triple. This gives the Witherlord a very good threat range of 9 inches from his starting point, and he's probably the only fighter you would really want to use, talking about the doubles, really want to use Gruesome Harvest on. So if you can, try and go for a chaff unit. You're confident that the base damage of his attacks, so the 8 damage, will kill. Then you can use Gruesome Harvest, and then you can splash for your big triple 6 lethal injection on the next turn. Next up, we are going into Bloated Ones. There are 2 profiles of Bloated Ones. We've got Bloated Ones with Raker Claws and Bloated Ones with Raker Claws and Hooked Nets. They are very similar to each other. The Bloated one with double Raker Claws has 5 attacks, strength 4 with 2/5 damage. quite good. Again, average movement of 4, defense of 4, and 18 wounds, so only 2 less than the Witherlord. The Bloated One with net is effectively exactly the same, except it has 1 less attack, but it does get access to the hooked net double. And the hooked net double is you pick a visible enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter and you roll a dice. On a 3 or more, you allocate a number of damage points to that fighter equal to the roll, and that fighter can't make move actions or disengage actions for the rest of the battle round. So that's the main difference between the two. They also have access to the slashing attack triple. So you roll a dice for each visible fighter within 3 inches, and now 3 inches is a long way. And on a 3 or 4, you allocate 1 damage point to that fighter, and on a 5 or 6, you allocate damage points equal to the value of this ability. So again, it's something that works well with Gruesome Harvest. If you can kill something on the previous turn, run into a group of guys, use your slashing attack, do massive amounts of damage if that's something that you are able to do. Bloated Ones overall, they're your heavy hitters. They've got very good damage profile at comparatively not a lot of points, and that makes them extremely efficient. You can see there the points per wound is at 17.4 and 21, which again puts them in the top third of all fighters in the game for efficiency. Now, there are arguments to be made around which of the two fighters is actually better, but personally I would recommend taking a mix if you can, as the two builds, whilst they are similar, they can achieve different things depending on what you're actually fighting against. Again, I'm going to go over a few scenarios, and we'll see how it goes. So looking at the hooked net versus the Raker Claw Bloated Ones themselves. The net is effectively an extra attack on a double that always hits on 3, doing anywhere between 3 and 6 damage. Now that's better than your normal attacks, which for the most part will be hitting at 4s at base 2 damage. So in the event that you only get to attack once, so for example when you do a move attack as your 2 actions, it's always better to have nets over your claws. Now the damage is very similar against defense 4 fighters, but when you need to wound something that's defense 5 or more, the extra attack hitting on a 3, because again, hook nets always hit on 3s, is better than an additional attack from Onslaught hitting on your base skill. Looking at nets versus onslaught, so if you've got your Bloated One with Raker Claw and Hooked Net, which ability are you going to use? So if you only get to attack once, like I've said, net as an extra attack that always hits on 3s, doing 3 to 6 damage, is always better than your normal attacks, so you always want to use your nets if you only ever get to attack once. When you're attacking twice, you always want to onslaught over using your nets, unless you're winning on 5s, in which case nets are actually the better option. So the 1 additional attack that will hit on a 3 is better than the 2 additional attacks that will hit on 5s. Of course, if you're bringing your standard Raker Claw Bloated Ones, then you always onslaught, because they don't have access to nets, so that's absolutely fine. The slashing attack versus onslaught is interesting. So normally, abilities like slashing attack are generally never worth a triple, as a standard onslaught is better for damage against most targets due to the high base and crit damage of the claws. However, like I did say, slashing attack has a pretty big range of 3 inches, so that makes it an interesting prospect, as a Bloated One has the toughness and the amount of wounds to allow it to survive against a unit of chaff, so it allows it to run in, live, and have really good reach with the extra slashing attack damage. So I think in the event where you're playing maybe something like Soulblight Gravelords, you might want to think about using slashing attack over something like an onslaught just to get more damage onto more guys. Going into Carrion Catchers, again, there are 2 versions of Carrion Catcher, one with a Snatcher hook and the other with an Impaler. They're 110 or 115 points respectively. They're very similar, they both have 2-inch range. They both have strength of 3 with 4 attacks, the only real difference being the damage profile 2-4 versus 2-5, and the ability to use Ensnaring Strike on the Snatcher. They all have access to Gruesome Harvest because everyone in Rotmire Creed does. This is the first time we're seeing the Blowpipe double that they both get to use. Blowpipe is where you pick a visible enemy fighter within 6 inches, you roll 2 dice, and for each 4+, you allocate a number of damage points equal to half the value of this ability. In addition, for each 6, you subtract 1 from that fighter's toughness characteristic to the end of the battle round. So you're going to be doing anywhere between 1 and 3 damage if you roll your... In the Warband, Carrion Catchers are probably the least effective units. They're less points efficient than Bloated Ones, as they do only about half damage for about a 20% discount. They're also lesser point efficient than Mirefolk Outcasts, which we're going to cover a bit later, because they're almost twice the price for not all that much more damage coming out of them. So personally, I wouldn't take them over either of the two other options. Despite that, they are still fairly efficient when compared to other fighters in the game. So if that's all that you've got, and you do get two of them in the base set, so maybe you want to look at which one of these you want to build over the other. I'm leaning towards the Impaler over the Snatcher Hook, just for the additional 5 on the crit damage. Again, looking through some scenarios, we've got Ensnaring Strike versus Rampage. Exactly the same with the Witherlord. Ensnaring Strike is only one attack with a hook versus Rampage, which is one attack with a move. So always Rampage. This is why I effectively would always take Impalers over the Snatcher Hook. Secondly, we've got Onslaught versus Blowpipes, which is interesting. Now, because they're generally better, the one attack double stat here in this section is for Blowpipes and not for Onslaught. So you see there, if you DPA 4, you get to attack once with a double. So this is again on the Blowpipe. If you only get to attack once, it's always better to use your double on Blowpipes, because Blowpipes are effectively 2 attacks that always hit on 4s versus your 1 attack that hits on whatever. If you get to attack twice, it's always better to use Onslaught, because both the Snatcher Hook and the Impaler has just better damage. On average, your Blowpipes are going to be doing 2 damage, whereas you have 2 base damage on both weapons here. So, again, I would be looking at taking Impalers and generally looking to Onslaught as much as you can, unless you only get 1 attack. Finally, going into Mirefolk Outcasts. Again, as with the Carrion Catchers and the Bloated Ones, they have 2 profiles, one with Bilewood Weapons and the other with Bilewood Weapon and Shield. The guy with Bilewood Weapons has 4 attacks, Strength 3, 1, 3, which is fine for a chaff unit anyway. Movement 4, again average, Defense 3, and 10 wounds. 10 wounds is pretty decent. The Weapon and Shield has 3 attacks, Strength 3, 1, 4, so same damage profile but 1 less attack. And the only difference is he's got Defense 4 as opposed to Defense 3, which makes him a little bit tankier. And he's got the 2-inch range on his spear, which is quite nice. The only abilities they have are Gruesome Harvest, which we've covered, and the Blowpipes themselves. You see their damage isn't all that much to write home about. They're still fairly efficient at 20 points and 22 points per wound effectively. And they're going to be doing, if you want to throw your doubles into these guys, which I don't necessarily recommend, because ideally you want to be using them on your bigger Bloated Ones. They'll do 5.6, 5.2, so around between 5 and 6 damage on average. So, like I've said, they are the chaff units of your warband. Which flavor you want to take, so double weapons or shield, will really depend on the local meta you're facing and how many points you've got left over. Having tested both of them, I'm preferring the Bilewood Weapon and Shield nowadays. I generally have some points left over in my warbands anyway. And the extra defense 4 I find really helps, especially due to fighters in the game having higher strength on average, at least the stuff that's fielded. We're looking at more strength 4 stuff as opposed to strength 3 stuff. And again, with toughness, you're looking at more toughness 4 stuff as opposed to toughness 3 stuff. So the additional attack from the Outcast with weapons isn't really pulling its weight. But again, it depends on what you're facing. It really depends on your preference. There's only one real scenario here, which is Blowpipe versus Onslaught. The DPA for 1 attack double stat that I have here is again for Blowpipes. It's almost always more effective to use the Blowpipe double than +1 attack on either a single or double attack in this case, due to Blowpipes effectively be 2 extra attacks anyway, but they always hit on 4s with an average 2 damage. So yeah, always Blowpipes, never Onslaught on your Mirefolk Outcasts. Looking into some things that you might want to take as allies, or possibly look at monsters. Now, Rotmire Creed, they're good as they are, I think. They're all movement 4, though, so they really can benefit from a fast-moving, hard-hitting unit to ally in, almost to act as a distraction from your Bloated Ones and your Witherlord. Bloated Ones and Witherlord only have 18 or 20 wounds, so they're not the most tanky units in the game. So having something to go, oh, look at me, fight me, is really something I feel that is quite useful to have. A few examples that I've looked at and I've taken myself are the Blissbringer. It's got very good base speed, and it's got abilities to boost its damage, which is quite nice. It's got a lot of attacks. It's also got a net ability on top of the damage boosting ability, so it can kind of do almost everything that you want at only a 205 point package. Now, the problem I have with it, and the problem I had when I used it, is it's only strength 3, and like I've said before, a lot more fighters are defense 4 nowadays. So going from wounding on 4s to wounding on 5s is pretty rough, even with the 5 attacks. A Varangard is a very good option on top of this. It's got excellent stats, it's got excellent abilities, it can boost the amount of attacks that it's doing, it's got good damage at 3-6, it will wound most things on 3s, it's got 30 wounds, defense 6, it's essentially everything you want, but it's expensive. It's 285 points. I've tried to get a triple bloated one Varangard list to work. I just haven't had enough points to do everything I wanted, so I kind of needed to cut the old Varangard. Another interesting option might be the Thaumaroid Crusher. Similarly to the Varangard, it's got good offense, good defense, and it's got very good stats for its points cost. Incidentally, you can fit 3 Bloated Ones, a Witherlord, and a Thaumaroid, and still do like a 7-man warband, which is something that's pretty exciting. It's not as fast as any of the other 2 options, but you know, movement 6 still a lot quicker, and it's good distraction effectively. Now, taking to the extreme, you could look up different kinds of monsters to take, again, to provide a very big distraction. Both the Witherlord and the Bloated Ones have good damage, and Outcasts are cheap enough chaff, so if you really wanted to double down on the distraction card effects whole thing, you can bring a monster and still have a functional warband. Some good options are the Cygor. Due to its Helm Masonry, it gives you a very good ranged profile, or something like the Gorgon, even if it's only used for its ridiculously high amount of damage. You can run that into other monsters and it'll effectively knock them over. As long as you win the activation war, the Gorgon is pretty good. Finally, I've got a couple of lists here. One is the list I've just taken to Warhammer World. Keep your eyes peeled for the video on that. I'm going to be doing a tournament report on this one. Effectively, it's Witherlord, Bloated One with Raker Claws, Bloated One with Net ×2, a Mindstealer Sphinx, and 2 Outcasts with Shields. It's got 7 fighters, so about average in terms of activations. It's got really good damage from the 3 Bloated Ones, the Witherlord, and the Mindstealer, so effectively most of the warband is sitting at 2-5 damage, so it can chew through other chaff warbands quite easily. This is specifically to make sure that I have an answer to Soulblight Gravelords, because I really want to be able to knock out things like skeletons and things like their Graveguard in one attack and an ability's worth of fighting, if I really can. It's also not very triple hungry, so it allows you to save your dice for doubles for things like nets, for onslaught. The Mindstealer is in there for a couple of reasons. Got generally good stats, it's got good movement, and it's got a net through telepathic threatening, so it makes it for a very flexible fighter that I can be relatively sure that it's going to survive the battle because it's got its defense 5 and its 30 wounds. Also, it's got a quad that effectively allows you to make an enemy fighter not be able to activate for a turn, so it's kind of clutch if you get it and you're fighting against another monster. Turn up there, run in, use your quad, turn it off, and then that's at least a monster out for a quarter of the battle. So that's effectively why I took it. Like I said, keep your eyes peeled for the tournament report, where I will go through how exactly I did with this one. Secondly, this list was suggested by the Salty Sea. I'm going to put his link in the description below. He was talking about what he would take for this event that's just gone at Warhammer World, and he was talking about monsters specifically. So we've got the Witherlord because you need one, either a Gorgon or a Cygor because there are enough points kind of to do both, 2 Bloated Ones with nets, 3 Outcasts with shields. So it's still 7 fighters, so like the first list, it's got a decent amount of activations, but this time it also includes the Gorgon or the Cygor. again for the ranged ability or the threat to enemy chimeras. It's very versatile. It's got a lot of damage from its fighters. So it's again it's a list that I quite like, but it's something that I didn't want to take to Warhammer World's event specifically because I didn't want to take a monster, or more like I didn't want to have to go through buying either a Cyclor or a Gorgon, painting it and modeling it to theme it for my warband. And yeah, that's it really. I think overall Rotmire Creed are quite competitive in terms of the bespoke warbands. I think they are one of the most competitive just by the points efficiency of their characters and the amount of damage that they can put out. And yeah, I'm very happy with them. I'm going to take them to a bunch more events and we will see how they do. I'll also include in the description below the link to one of my tournament reports that I went 3-0 with Rotmire Creed, so I managed to win that event, and that was pretty good with them. But yeah, hopefully this guide has helped you out, given you some thoughts about how you want to play Rotmire Creed. So please, like I said before, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know what you think about the Creed, what you would take if you think I'm crazy and you shouldn't be taking all Bloated Ones, for example. Let me know, and yeah, we can have a good talk about it. But as always, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.